Okay, welcome to the 53rd episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today, I'm excited to be speaking to Rosemary Lamaison. Rosemary is a counsellor with 30 years experience. She works with adult clients from diverse backgrounds and covers a broad range of issues. These include couples, relationship and marriage guidance, parent and family issues and anxiety, stress, low confidence, or low self-esteem. She also works with abuse and boarding school syndrome. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you.
So I first met you virtually last year at the Boarding School Survivors Conference, where you were holding space for one of the groups. And then I met you again this year, about a month ago, and we had a conversation about coming on the podcast. So first of all, thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak.
No, I'm delighted to have that opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. So how I like to begin the podcast is just for you to share a little bit of how you got into the work you now do. A bit of your journey.
Okay, so how did I get into it? Well, I was counselling in an organisation, and Helena Lavendel was my supervisor at the time. And she was talking that she and Nick Duffel, were going to run groups, and they wanted to train up some women to help facilitate the women's workshops. I thought, oh, well, I'm a counsellor. I boarded. I've run many groups. I did a lot of group work when I worked with parents of different people, not boarders. So I'd done group experience. I thought, well, that's fine. Ticks the box. I'll go for the training, which indeed I did. I did their first training in 2005, I think it was. So then I began to sort of explore more and learn a lot more about how other people had experienced the boarding. And in fact, I hadn't really got boarding clients, but over the course of time since then, I've worked with quite a lot of boarding clients. I can't actually tell you how many, but a lot of boarding clients, and meet with colleagues who do the same. And some of those colleagues run the women's workshops. So it's really interesting to pick up different people's knowledge and observations, really, of how women and men experience it and the impact, the long-term impact. And I think how some women react differently or sit with some of the experiences differently. So I know you've had some podcasts on puberty, but, I think men and women tackle that differently. A lot of my clients come back from go back to the sort of having been at school some time ago. So a lot of clients, in my experience, come through quite late in life. Maybe they've been busy, children and families and careers, and then they've got a bit more time to think. But there's a difference in what happened in the schools way back and perhaps what's happening now. I'm not saying it's good now, but I think it's different now. So I've always been really keen on observations and piecing things together. And underlying it all, most of the people who come through for help have been traumatized, and it's had such a lifelong effect. So anything I can do that will help people have a better experience or help people talk it through. I think there isn't a space to talk it through, to be honest. And so some people just come and need to tell their story and process as they go.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things I loved at the Boarding School Survivors Conference last month is you gave that talk on peer mentoring in boarding schools. So I love that you've worked with people who've been in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and you have the experience of what they're actually like now.
Yeah.
And how they're impacting people.
And of course, what I was keen to do was bring about a change, which is why I also did a lot of parenting work outside of boarding, where I want to bring a lot of change. And no point just working with the child. I think you have to work with the parents to tweak a little bit of what they do, or how they communicate, how they understand things. So really, with a peer mentor, I think I in some of the houses managed to change the cultures, because I got the older boys instead of I'm going to get the younger ones. The more sensitive boys, the ones who didn't want to do that, suddenly had a role and they were seen to play an important part in their house, and they did. And they could then treat people better. And it really took off. I mean, it's really interesting. It did change how other boys how the older boys treated the younger boys.
Mm,
There's always going to be trouble, but there was a lot less trouble.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a subject which is close to my heart. I've always been interested in, not always, but I've been a scout leader now for 13 years for that age range. So I really can resonate, and I'm involved with a rite of passage organization called the Mankind Project, where I have friends who do similar work, but more with the children who are really struggling in society, drugs, addiction, or crime. So,
And
so
why would they be struggling with that? You know, the change is possible. It just needs a handful. It needs more people doing it. I'm a bit involved with the Wave Trust organisation who are trying to bring about change. So that's an interesting other topic another time.
yeah. So today, what I'd love to explore is a little bit about the female experience for girls, women of boarding school.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, to begin with, just I'd love you to speak about some of these key core issues for women ex-boarders, but also, for girls who are at boarding school now or were. But what are some of the key issues?
I think there are a lot of key issues. I think I probably need to flag up that a lot of the things, the impacts affect both men and women, boys and girls. And I think that's important, really. So I might start by just saying that I think key things are, where's home? And that full self. So many people have a lost 7-year-old. Actually, that's a lot more men than women. Perhaps women aren't aware of it, or less women went at 7. They'll have some clients who went at 4 and 5, girl clients. And the language that is used by a boarder is so different from the rest of the population. I've got some things here. So catastrophic, carnage, disaster, brutal, endure, rigid, ordeal, horrific, harsh, bleak, cold, Spartan, dread, institutional, uncaring. They end up just thinking, I've got to soldier on. Just get on with it. You will have heard this too. But this is men and women. They think it's like a prison. Lockdown had such an impact. Can't see my family. Even if you didn't want to see your family, you couldn't see them. And they felt caged. They felt imprisoned, whereas a lot of non-boarders felt loneliness and felt isolated and were unable to get out. But it didn't do the trigger of being 7 and being dumped there and dropped off, abandoned. Very different. Lack of physical and emotional warmth, and often hungry. So we might come on to eating things. And I just think there are just lots and lots of losses. It's a very, very long list, and that prolonged bereavement, the experience sort of gets embedded in you. And if you're 7 or younger than 8, child development wise, your brain can't make sense of it. So you assume that I'm bad, I've done something wrong, they don't like me, let's drop him off, let's dump her down there. And they just assume it's something about them, whereas actually it's probably a family circumstance, or it's the family with good intentions to give you continuity if they're always moving around or they're abroad, or there are problems at home. But I have got, excuse me, I have got a few comments from female ex-boarders. Can I just read out a little?
Please do.
A little list. I mean, it just is better than it just coming from me. It's so many people. So sort of the emotional complexity in thinking of a child. Why was I sent away? Was it my fault? They resented being got rid of to a boarding school. Where's home? Is something wrong with me? Don't they love me? Don't they want me at home? Unable to cry. And it's really interesting. Women talk about it. Men notoriously have not been allowed to cry, but women say they never saw a girl cry. There was no one to cry with. I mean, I think that's extraordinary, because so many must have cried. Difficult to share feelings. Who's looking after me? Which then leads a woman to become fiercely independent. It might for a man, but a very independent woman is viewed differently from an independent. One is positive and one is negative. No one in authority has an interest in me or was there to listen to me. No one ever says, how's your day? So you learn to cope alone, and you don't know how to ask for help. But that then goes, that's male and female, but that then goes into relationship difficulties, which we might talk about. Nightmares still in adulthood. Talked to someone the other day. You know, that terror. Someone says it feels like falling down a lift shaft backwards. What an experience when you're a child. Tendency to shut down and withdraw. Well, that certainly goes into relationship problems. And someone said it either screws you up or toughens you up. And this structured time, everything was structured. Male and female had this as well. No time to relax, no time to chill. Don't know how to share or relax or sit quietly. But it comes up endlessly in relationships. Some people now I'm talking to who are coming up for retirement, and they're absolutely fearful of it. You know, I'm always doing. What am I going to do? As opposed to just being able to be. A lot of people talk about choice, having decisions made for them, very little choice. You know, actually going back to school. So this is again male and female, but a woman was saying the other day, she went to the school and do you like it here? And she's not sure at 8 what she's being asked. She certainly doesn't know the significance of what she's being asked. Or a young boy was taken around various schools and you know, got to one and do you like it here? It was a long way from home and he thought we were just going to look at the local schools. Do you like it here? Well, he's very polite. She was very polite. Yes. You get left there, you know, if that's where you're going. You have no idea what that means. So not being in charge of your life and being swept along. Somebody said they can handle captivity, but freedom is the problem. I thought that was an interesting comment. So that lack of privacy in the school, I'm sure men feel it too, but the women, there's no space to call your own. So then you take that into adult life and you're desperate to be on your own sometimes, and that doesn't come with an explanation. So the partner doesn't know what this is, or your children don't understand what it is. And you might not understand enough yourself to be able to tell them. So a lot of people end up always planning and always preparing, you know, over preparing and over planning. I suppose to feel safe, but also to make their life work a bit better. I've got one person who hid between a fence, a boundary fence and a building, so they wouldn't be visible. You know, you have shared baths, might come to that with puberty, and the bedroom environment can be one of enormous anxiety. So now come to relationships, you know, you're not relaxed, you're enormous anxiety. One girl had her bedding thrown out of the window. A girl at my school, I boarded from 12, 13, so I didn't have the 7, 8 horrors. She was the largest in our group, a really delightful soul, but I think she was picked on because she was large, I don't know. And they took the bed springs out of her bed. I mean, how do you go to bed and save face and say, oh, this is funny? You know, you've got to be pretty strong to be able to overcome, oh, you've thrown my bedding out of the window again, have you? You know, the bullies can do that. The bullies, you know, if they're being bullied themselves, but the quieter ones, I mean, that has a long-term impact. We're safe. Put your head on the sun. As you say, I've been in a boarding school now. Put your head on the pillow at night. You're not safe. You don't know that you're going to be able to put your head on the pillow, and no one's going to come and storm your area. So I think that has a long-term impact, which perhaps other people don't. I mean, non-boarders can have their horrors, but at least you're based at home. You believe someone will be there to just keep you safe and trust you. I've got one female client who is still now at sort of 60-ish, not safe being seen asleep, doesn't want to be seen asleep. Just imagine that. You know?
Yeah,
so other people say they're, you know, fit in everywhere but belong nowhere. I think a lot of people say that. I'm sure others, non-boarders, feel this too, but there's that feeling of being othered. A lot of people avoid a group. You will have come across this, I think, Piers. They avoid going in, or if they go into a cafe, they sit with their back to the wall. They don't join the men's clubs or the women's clubs or the groups. Don't want to go into a social setting. Talked to one woman who, in her mid-years, she went to somebody's birthday celebration, I think, and she just chose to go and find a little seat on her own and just sit there. She was quite contented. But she didn't want to have to talk with people talk with her. Or... It's isolating, and you know, you wonder if if she would have done that had she had a different childhood.
Mm.
It did partly come from family. I mean, I have to say, family is a big factor here.
Yeah, yeah.
It depends how you were treated and how secure you felt.
Mm.
So a long list.
Yeah,
There are more comments that could be made.
yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, I can resonate with so many of those.
Can you?
Yeah, I mean, as part of my work is the work on myself, you know, stopping working, you know, over preparing, over planning, you know, it's like to actually be able to stop. I'm much better now, but I couldn't stop, and that's why I had a breakdown in my 20s. Is I arrived at a monastery and I just couldn't stop, and because I was living in the same place that I was working, I was just doing 24, not 24 hours, but every waking hour I was doing something until I physically couldn't get out of bed anymore. And I had to train myself to stop by sitting, looking at a point on the wall, breathing, and just keep coming back to, no, I've got to do this, just sit. So, yeah.
And do you think that's because in a boarding setting, it's so structured, you don't have free time? I mean, I suppose the rational part of me thinks that people are being kept busy so they don't get up to mischief, or they don't, you know, go sexual with each other, something of that sort, maybe. But they're being occupied. I mean, at my place, we used to, after lunch, have to go in silence to our rooms, or we were in communal rooms, for an hour. I mean, we didn't need a rest. I think they were just trying to get us out of the way. Or crocodile walks, endless crocodile walks. I mean, I played lots of sports, so I was all right. I was busy on Saturdays. But other people, you know,
What was the crocodile walk?
Oh, you go for a walk around, you know, wherever it is, around the area, out of the building with a staff member, but you're in twos. It's very sort of orchestrated. You're not free to just walk. It's a structured walk in a structured setting. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I hadn't heard of crocodile.
Well, I suppose because you're in twos in a long line. But structured time. I mean, one female client I've got would rush through everything she could rush through. She was bright and she was able to do all of that. And she would go into the music rooms just to snatch 20 minutes. No one around. You know, you haven't got a bedroom where no one's around. You haven't got I suppose you go to the loo, but even they're fairly communal. So there isn't anywhere you can go. So she found the music rooms and she just used to, and I've heard one or two people do this, they just create a little space, like the person who hid between the building and the wall. Boundary fence, a little bit of private space.
Yeah. Yeah, I can resonate. There's a few levels there. For me, one of the things was if you were seen to be doing nothing, if you were just sat, especially on the younger years, right, cross, go and make me a cup of tea. You know, we still had fagging at the school, even though Eton, I know, stopped it in the 60s. I mean, I've spoken to people who went to my school in the noughties and they were still fagging then. So if you were seen to be doing nothing, then right, go and do that. Go and do that.
But think of the damage, Piers, that does as an adult, because you know, you might be in a partnership where someone is sitting very relaxed and wants you to be very relaxed. You're not, you're looking for something to do. It's wrong. You know, the women certainly, and sounds like the men too, have that message of I should be doing something. And of course there isn't a should. There's I could be doing it and I could not. But actually a boarder finds it really difficult to not.
Yeah.
They're really, really difficult. But doesn't understand why.
Yeah. They don't understand why. And I was kind of reflecting on this last week and looking at Nick's book, this idea that our leaders have been through this. It's almost like a culture and belief system that, you know, you can't sit, you know, at the moment people are being asked to do 2-3 jobs. Come on, you're not doing enough. And it's like, there's no free time. It's like everything, boom, boom, boom. And I was sharing in this video that went on holiday to Greece. And in the airport, there was just some locals, you know, workers in the airport just sat down chatting. I'm like, I've never seen that in the UK. You wouldn't get away with it. People who are on duty sat around. You'd receive shame or they're lazy or something. So Yeah.
And I wonder if lockdowns had a difference because a lot of people were working from home, or a lot of people on furlough. Some people have reduced their working days, and maybe there is a change. But I mean, we're probably not talking about borders here. We're probably talking about the population at large.
Yeah.
Borders are programmed. I mean, yeah, just programmed. But if you're programmed from 13 upwards or 16 upwards, is different from if you're programmed at 4, 5, 7, 8. You're programmed young. You don't know that you're programmed, and therefore you just behave in that way. You develop patterns, which I think fascinating thing for me is that the clients who come through at a slightly older age are suddenly realizing they've got these patterns. And only when you realize it and become aware, can you then perhaps make a decision. Do I work at changing that? Do I just say, I'm not going to? But you don't know you've got the patterns. That's just how you are.
Yeah.
They get embedded in, concreted in very early.
Yeah, wasn't it? At my last podcast, there was a clinical psychologist, and he was saying that, I think it was Ignatius saying, "Give me a child until they're 7, and I'll give you the adult." And so that really resonates.
I think the Jesuits went down. I always associate that with the Jesuits, but it may be other people who've said it.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about relationship issues, intimacy difficulties that especially women have. I know this will relate to men as well, but
it does. It's a very, very common theme. Yes, people just not knowing what to do. Well, I suppose does it make a difference if you went to a same-sex school? It probably does, because you don't get the opportunity to make friendships with, girls don't have the opportunity to make friendships with boys. And so they perhaps get it slightly skewed and see them later on as a sexual partner rather than just a fellow being. And I think men might be the same. I did talk to one man who was, he was in retirement, but he was talking back to when he was in his late 27. He was, I think, 28, and he wanted to put his arm around the girl he was with, and he just didn't know how to do it. He froze. You don't want younger people to feel like that, do you? So how are you going to then go into the intimacy and feel comfortable? Very difficult. I think I think it stems from fear, feeling unsafe, lack of trust, lack of self-confidence, hypervigilance. I have so many clients who are really not a little bit anxious. They are just wary. They're hypervigilant, and it works against them. It worked for them. I mean, well done them for getting that pattern when they were needing it. But it works against them now. And they close down or they go silent, push people away before they're rejected, push people away before they get abandoned. That abandoned and rejected sense. I think it was Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Probably haven't pronounced him correctly. Who the body knows the score.
Yeah.
He says if you feel unwanted as a child, so you've misunderstood, you're not unwanted, but if you feel unwanted, that just stays with you, forever. It's I'm not wanted here, and that's a sense you don't make sense of it, you don't understand it, but that feeling, the body holds on to that. And I think people take that into relationships. I'm sure you've come across this with people you've worked with or talked with. And how do you unlearn that to relearn what's needed? I think people can be partly in a relationship and partly split off. If the pain is really great, they dissociate.
I've often heard partners come to me saying about Exborders, saying they blow hot and cold. 1 minute they're into it, and then suddenly it's like, well, where have they gone?
But I think that maybe, I don't know, I think that may be the wanting to be into it, the yearning. A bit like you yearn for whatever it is you're needing from your family and haven't got. But then when it comes close to you, oh, no, and is that the rejection before I get rejected or abandoned? Is that I don't know how to do this? Is that I've never had a hug or had kindness or warmth from someone? I don't know what to do. Don't have the answers, but I can see the hot and cold. Because I think when you're very little, you just, to survive, you do have to adapt to the system.
Mm.
You learn, I was just thinking of the 7-year-old and the full self, you learn day 1, day 2, if you're running a bit late, that you have got to actually show no vulnerability.
Mm.
It's in a relationship, ideally you do show vulnerability, but you learn very quickly to hide it, and your authentic self, your true self, I know it disappears. People don't know where it disappears, but it's not gone. But one of the jobs in therapy is to try and help someone recapture that and relocate it and re-engage with it. So people stay in their head and they cope and they manage and so on. So this is perhaps not what you need in a relationship, the intimacy, sharing. Don't share because you've never had anyone to share with. So you don't share feelings, you don't have a language for feelings. A sort of emotional atrophy, you might call it. There isn't the language.
Would you say about giving as well, because I see that with myself, but also with clients, it's almost like we disappear within. So we really struggle to give. And if you want to be in a relationship, you've got to give. And we've learned, no, don't give. So have you found that with people you've
Do you think that's because it's frightening to give, or they're worried of the consequences of giving? What do you make? What sense do you make of that?
Well, I think for me, giving, I think we learned that we couldn't expect anything from anyone. Often I found as a young boy at boarding school, I would give and be generous, and then it was just totally blatantly taken advantage of. I would give food, and then it was like, right, Piers, this is where you get your food from. We'll just steal everything, which happened to me.
Did it?
Yeah. One of the boys who was my nursemaid, we'd had someone who looked after us. One day he stole some of my food, and there was this big kerfuffle in the house, like, who has stolen this thing? And eventually he came forward, and it's like, oh, the one person who's looking after me has gone into my cupboard and stolen my food. And so I think that thing of giving on that level, and I think as well, hugs or love, if you try to give hug, Stephen Fry talks about that in his book. He just went up to a guy who's nearly drowned in the swimming pool and put his arm around him just to help him walking, and he was called gay at that point and humiliated in his school. And it was lucky that one of the teachers said to the whole of the school, well done to Stephen Fry for helping that young boy.
Yes.
And they quashed it. But
and what you're really saying is there's a risk attached to giving or helping or touching.
Exactly, a huge risk.
Well, I think that indicates probably other people's vulnerability. Certainly the touching, having worked more recently in a school, it's the vulnerability. And if you're feeling vulnerable, you're going to laugh at someone else or mock them, or so you're not looked at.
Yeah.
But that's very damaging to the one who's got the generosity in them to want to be helping.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people sabotage. I've got several women clients, younger women, who are looking for a relationship, and they often pick people that are not suitable, and at some level they'll realise that, but they're picking them so that they won't actually have to end up in a relationship. And the one says, she's just rubbish at a relationship, and she now realises she sabotages it. But she's so desperate, not desperate, she's longing to have that connection, but doesn't know how to do it, and so messes it up and makes it impossible for the other person, I suppose. And is really unhappy. Is just not familiar with being loved, and so is awkward and pushes that away. And I've got one or two people who quite clearly realise now in later life that they've stayed in an unloving relationship because they didn't want the abandonment, the rejection, the being alone, having felt alone all their lives. And they've stayed in something that hasn't really worked. Well, it won't have worked for either partner. And that's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And it's worse once they realise it's really thing. I've come across several people where there's a deep sadness and rage and anger, that because of childhood or because of an unloving family or because of A, B, or C, they have lived this life sort of unwittingly, surviving it all through. And then as they get a bit older, they realise, I have a lot of older clients who come through, I think, once their parents have died, because I think they may feel, I'm guessing here, they may feel freer to speak. There may be something about loyalty issues. They haven't liked, even if they haven't liked what the parents do, they've felt very loyal and not wanted to be critical. I have other clients who do challenge their parents, mainly unsuccessfully. But, you know, I just think the sadness of if I had had a different childhood, or if I had a different family experience, I wouldn't have been like this. I wouldn't have spent my life surviving. I have to say, I don't think this is just Borders, but I think the Borders experience is of a different nature.
Yeah.
And there is nowhere else to go. It's 24/7.
Yeah.
And that thing of where's home? You know, where is home? Where do you spend more time? Probably not with your family. You don't really know your siblings. You don't, you know, you miss your pets. You know, there's that whole, all those nice warm things you associate in your head with the word family are missing. Now, you would have heard this, but I'm just reading this. Somebody worked out that if you board between 7 and 18 for 11 years, they left home 132 times.
Yeah, I think I heard that on Joy Chevron's talk.
If you board between 13 and 18, so just 5 years, you actually leave your home 60 times. And so you know, I've only ever heard women saying this, but packing is a difficulty. They might be packing for somewhere they really want to go. Packing is a problem. It's something they put off. I'm sort of sidetracking a bit here, but writing Christmas cards or birthday cards, major nightmare. You know, Sunday, 1 hour allocated to writing letters. Some people have their letters read out in public.
Yeah,
I've only heard of one person with that. But you know, you often had your letters censored, and then you had to rewrite them. So letters become meaningless, and it's really hard to then say at Christmas or say at a birthday, write something warm and giving, as you're talking about.
Yeah.
These are long-term impacts that you know, you don't make sense of it until a bit later in life.
Yeah, I think I was very fortuitous that I was in a place in my 20s where I was a mess, and someone gave me Nick Duffel's book. Again, synchronicity. My therapist, that day I'd seen them in town. I was living in a Buddhist community, a monastery at the time, and I saw this lady in town, the psychotherapist, and she said to me, "You need to read The Making of Them." Got back to the monastery, and there in front of the door was this book, and I turned, and it was like, oh my God, it's The Making of Them. So that helped me. I think it might have been in my 40s that I'd got it, but because I had others in the monastery, and I worked with this Jungian analyst who supported me with that. But yeah, there's so many, like you say, so many things. When I was reading The Making of Them, it's like, oh my God, that's me. Oh, that relates to me. The double line. Oh yeah. And then, you know, even now, just reading Nick Duffel's Wounded Leaders again, it's like, wow.
I see you're surrounded by all these books.
Oh, I am. I've got hundreds of books. I've got, although I've not read all the way through it, I've taken definitely bits out. But yeah, that's one of my privileges of doing the podcast. I get to read these great books. So yeah, thank you. So relationships and intimacy difficulties. What about not having a voice, especially regarding women, or not being heard? Does that? Yeah.
I think, as you say, a lot of men stay quiet and silent, but I think women aren't encouraged to speak up. And nowadays, I do think it's very different. You get a lot of women who are very assertive and confident, certainly on the outside. But I think if you're going back to some of the clients that come through in their later years, the women, they weren't encouraged to be curious or speak out. Or, you know, one who was, I think she was probably just a curious child. She certainly questioned the rules. and was punished all the time, you know. So who is interested? Who is listening? Who wants to hear your view? And I think even so, you know, if you're in a crowd of people, so any school setting, but a boarding school setting, there isn't. You don't go home and have someone listening to you. Who is there to hear your view? So you just, I don't know that you necessarily go inwards, but that you just learn not to express yourself. And you certainly, I think this is where women are different. It's certainly not acceptable to sound, to get rid of it in an aggressive way. So if you want to say something that someone doesn't want to hear, I think men and women probably do this differently. And my experience is that some people, it's just sort of stops here. It doesn't go out. I think women, I read somewhere that women, when they're crying, probably in a relationship, it's because what they want to say, that person is not going to like, so they won't listen to it, they won't take it seriously, they won't react or respond in the way that's wanted. So actually, there is no point saying it. You're going to be seen as I don't know how you're going to be seen, to be honest. I don't think I know the words, but you're not going to speak it because it's fruitless. But actually, it's here.
Yeah,
it's got to come out somewhere. I don't think men are very good at handling the tears, but I mean, I think women don't really want to cry. That what they want to is rage and say, "Why aren't you listening to me?" So it gets stuck. I mean, I had one client who that happened. So pencil and paper, stick figures, drew the feeling. Oh my goodness, it was so clear. You know, wonderful, just wonderful to be able to express it. Knew what it was, but it wasn't allowed to say something negative or unpleasant or critical or what somebody didn't want to hear, whether that's your mum and dad or whether that's someone else in the school or a teacher. I've got one client who boarded at 5 and just realizes now she obeyed. She just obeyed, conformed. She has to make people comfortable. Priority. She doesn't make herself comfortable, makes others. And realizes now that she's just been a slave to her partner for about 40 years. I mean, that's an interesting word to use, isn't it?
Slave. Wow.
So no voice, you know, no opinion. She's got plenty of opinion. She was a teacher and terrific with the children and has written all sorts of things and yes, done a lot. But in her own personal life, doesn't express herself and actually doesn't always know what it is she might express. So that's where the body keeps the score. You know, the body is such a messenger.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable? Are you uncomfortable? Oh, I know that. What do I do about it? How do I do it differently? Don't know that. Just get on with it would be an expression someone like that would use. Just get on with it. It's easier. And in the relationships, the girl who thinks she's rubbish at it and sabotages, it's just easier not to go through the pain and the agony of liking and then finding that's not worked out. It's sad. So not being heard, I think women sort of are taught or trained, this is society for that generation, to work around other people, and you know their role is to look out for other people, and so they stop being able to know that they could also look out for themselves, which would include speaking out. There's no point speaking out if there isn't a receptive audience that's going to respond in a way that's of any use to you at all. And I would think some men fall into this as well, don't they? You don't speak out your discomfort or rage or...
Yeah, I bottled it up, I think. Before my realizations in the monastery was I used to just bottle everything up, and then once a year I would just explode, but it would be right, I'd go for a run, scream. Wah.
Yes, a physical release and a body release.
Exactly, but never at someone.
You see, I don't think I don't think it's acceptable in society for women to go raging. I've got a wonderful, I don't know if you can see this, but there are 4 shapes, identical shapes. The man is single-minded, but she is stubborn. Different shape. He's ambitious, but she's aggressive. Another shape. He's warm. She is gushing. and another, the leader, but she's the castrator. It's the same body language, but it's interpreted by the population. I just think it's quite funny, but it isn't funny because it's exactly the problem, that if you are a woman, you're seen as bossy. If you're a man, you're probably seen as really organized, doing really well. It's a plus, whereas her same language or attitude or facial expression is a negative, and it's not welcomed.
Yeah, I remember that at school. So the boys, those that were promiscuous, were seen as the studs. The girls, they were called bikes. That was the phrase that people would use for them. It was like,
You can ride them.
yeah, it was like, you know, and the podcast I did with Amelia, number 44, because she was at the same school as me, that she said there was quite a few instances she heard of the girls being totally humiliated by the boys, stealing their clothes and things like that. So, yeah, it's this, you know, what is seen as a, you know, a real great trait for a man is seen as a terrible trait for a woman. Or
when I used to do the PSHE in a boys' school, you know, so 13 upwards, I would use that, you know, the stud or the slut, and you know, always encourage the girl along the lines they're interested in. But once that's happened, don't want to know her, and they spread the word. It's very cruel. And why is it different?
Yeah.
And love and lust, you know, we used to have all these interesting debates and conversations to try and throw out a slightly different angle, you know, female angle into the young boys' thinking.
Yeah. And I think we had that conversation a bit before on other podcasts about misogyny, you know, in this country, but certainly in schools as well.
Well, I think the girls' schools are institutionalized misogyny. They have been, you know, primarily preparing men for the empire and days gone by, and the girls, sort of my generation, learned that they had to that was how it was. You didn't really have the choice. And you had to adapt to a man's world if you wanted to show you were successful or able. You had to sort of take on the male way of doing things, male management, whereas women have got their own way of being much more cooperative and creative and communicate differently. And I wonder if men were a bit threatened by that. They hadn't been brought up with it and they didn't see it. And they may all have had mothers who didn't have careers because that was the way it was in those days. You might have had a job, but it was the men who had the career. That was their expectation and their pressure for a lot of them. But yes. In fact, there was something there was an article in the paper just I think in November, recently anyway, about a head teacher of a girls' school. Just saying that, you know, there still isn't really the space for women to be seen and allowed to be creative and cooperative, and it's happening more, but she was commenting it's still there. Whereas the men are freer to operate their way, and it's almost seen that that's a good way. And some management styles are appalling. They're aggressive. They're, you know, they're not working with, they're working at their team.
Yeah, and I think in Nick's book he talks about this idea that the British Empire morphed into the corporate world. So, you know, those same things of being shut down, dominating, just became the corporate world. And has it really changed? You know, we're still, you know, it's better, but it's still about how much we can make as profit. And therefore those management styles, I presume they're improving, I know, in certain companies. But yeah, I imagine they are quite similar.
Well, if that leads us into something about girls' education, I've got various comments from people. So I certainly think, again, I'm going back into the people who were at school, you know, some time ago and are now in their later years, much lower academic expectations from parents and from staff. So it wasn't really A levels and higher education. It was much more, you know, GCSE, off to finishing school. Someone said that the expectation of their school were, I'm just quoting here, the girls will be fulfilled by being a good wife and know how to run a home for the husband and become mothers. Well, I don't think the young girls now would go with that. And I'm just aware there were less opportunities for the girls compared to brothers or male cousins. I mean, it was just very different. Extracurricular activities, very limited, I think. Whereas some of the boys could do a range of things and had time and were encouraged to do that. So the girls' extra sort of non-academic learning was missing as well. Certainly the school I was at, the more ambitious parents, I think, took their children out and sent them off, where they would end up going to university. But I've got clients who talked about being bright, going to school, maybe had a scholarship, maybe just were very bright, academically able. But it wasn't an advantage. You either overachieved for your parents to think, oh, well, I'm pleased I sent her to that school at a young age. With, the child sort of unconsciously took on. Or you overachieved in order to get this sort of applause or the approval. But I don't think your peers particularly liked it. And even those people bright, they ended up top of the class. It's full of self-doubt. In their 40s, 50s, 60s, they're still full of self-doubt, and yet they've done well in life. Why they're still full of self-doubt? Where does that come from? I wonder. No mirroring, no feedback. You're only good you're only praised if you achieve. You're not praised for being you.
And what I found in my school is that you didn't want to be too good. You didn't want to be too bad. You wanted to be what I call it flatline, be a zombie. If you were too bright, you were called a SWAT, teacher's pet, you're too bright. So you didn't want to be clever. You didn't want to get the answers right. Too many.
The other pupils don't like it, do they?
No, because we were, I found this in sport myself, as I was a brilliant sportsman. But if I was winning in a race or swimming, my body would freeze up and I would start to lose.
Right.
And I would sabotage myself. So I was always number 2 at school, never number 1, because it didn't feel comfortable to me.
You could be number 1.
Yeah, it didn't feel comfortable. And it's the same academically. I didn't think I was very clever. So I think I can definitely resonate.
I wonder how the children of today manage them, and I'm not well informed on this, but the pressure to pass an exam. I mean, so many exams from so young, constantly, and to achieve and to succeed. And I know in some of the top girls' schools now, the pressure is far too high. It's just unhealthy. So you've got a lot of problems with self-harming and you've got a lot of problems for the youngsters. But a lot of those will be sent to the school because they could be number 1. They could all be number 1. But their peer group aren't going to like that. That's a difficult one for a young brain to get their head around.
Yeah, rather than everyone being celebrated, it's like brilliant. It's like, being almost punished. The pressure at the moment, because I'm a scout leader, I see it with the girls and the boys, just in a small micro section. But during this year, most of them didn't come during exam times.
Right.
Like the pressure has suddenly ramped up another 10 times just in this last year or 2.
Yes.
And it's just like the pressure and again the self-harming. I've heard one parent say that their daughter was self-harming. They went to the school, and the school, thinking that it would be the only one that they might go, be okay. They said 60 girls had come forward self-harming. 60 out of a year of 120.
It's a very high figure. It's been a very high figure for quite a few years now.
Yeah.
Not just in boarding.
Yeah. This is mainstream school in West Yorkshire. So wow. I
think that just thinking of the girls being encouraged or really not encouraged, I think if you're the only girl in a family, your family, perhaps your father, invests more in you. If you've got an older brother, or the boys have got if the men in the family or the parents in the family have got a different attitude, I'd like to say old-fashioned attitude, but I think it's still there, the girl can get overlooked, and the boys will get encouraged to, I don't know, it might be do sport, or the family will watch the sport, or they will encourage them to learn. give them that wider general knowledge. And the girl, still the old-fashioned view of, don't need to do that for her because she'll just be the wife and the mother. And I just think that's, well, I think it's so wrong. But I do think if you are a girl, my observation is if you're the first in a family as a girl, or if you're the only girl. No, not the only girl. That's wrong. So if there are only girls, they have a better encouragement from the family. I don't think it makes a difference in the school. And I think probably boys are taught to be leaders and girls are taught to marry for love. Somebody made the comment. She said we were told to marry for love, but make sure you love where there is money and influence. They were being taught this. I think boys can be educated in the olden days, maybe still, for power, with the idea that they're better than women. That they will see perhaps their fathers in a job, have a high achieving job, and maybe I don't know what they see their mothers doing. If these top men will want a woman who's got ability, but do they also want her to have a career that's going to clash with their hours and their needs, and they've got to entertain some people, but she's disappeared off overseas for her job. That doesn't suit me. Yes, I think I'd just like to mention fear. I've got several clients who are so fearful. Actually, I have a male client as well in the past who got put down class, extremely bright. I mean, off the scale bright, got put down because fear got in the way, couldn't concentrate, didn't want to be there, furious that he was at the school. And she was just terrified. She was just terrified and anxious, and couldn't sort of enter her own body space comfortably. And so didn't learn. Put down a class, grew up thinking she wasn't able. Of course she's able. Once you get out of the school setting, you can suddenly realize you can do a course, you can train up, you can become this, this, and this, and do very well. But that school setting of fear.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe it stops some people growing, but I mean, you actually don't concentrate. How can you possibly concentrate if you're terrified all the time? Really more than just a bit frightened.
I think Bessel van der Kolk talks about that in his book, this idea that the brain freezes, or certainly when the brain freezes, there's no activity. So if you're kind of frightened, I don't think you're not, if you're relaxed, you're in that relaxed state, you can learn, you can really thrive. But if you're in fear, it's like, I think it's, first of all, if you're in fear, I think it's the prefrontal cortex stops working because you're getting ready to run. It's not, you need that to be relaxed.
You're going down to the fight, flight, freeze, or as someone's now added, flop, collapse.
Yeah. So
boys can be pretty unpleasant, and they mainly would be banter, which goes way over the top and becomes bullying, I think, and physical. Whereas girls can be quite bitchy. That look can be pretty unfriendly. Just a glance.
Yeah.
I do think the girls now have enormous pressure, though, and it's different. It's to achieve. It's a lot of girls at top schools are still having tutoring as well. I mean, when you're having free time, when you're mentally relaxing and having a calm space,
which that's definitely what we need. We need to kind of be on and be off, and we're not really having that.
And women take this into their motherhood, if and when they become mothers, which is often later than it used to be. But their patterns of working and patterns of behaving and patterns of surviving, which they may not be aware of, although they've lived with it for years, they will pass on. So that could be anxiety, it could be vigilance, it could be fear, it could be, the intimacy that can't hug and feel easy in your body. It could be the food issues.
Do you want to share a bit about food and eating?
Yes, I think I do have quite a lot of clients who are either, well, of course, anorexia in my day, we had one anorexic at school. None of us had a clue what that was. I mean, it just wasn't in the vocabulary.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there was any help for her. But anorexia has become a big issue. There's some interesting thinking about it. But I think a lot of people from a boarding school were hungry.
Yeah.
Sneak into the kitchen, see if they could grab something, went for comfort. You know, they were unhappy, so they would look to food for comfort. And even probably at home, if they weren't getting anyone spending any time with them, you know, the fridge was there. So it isn't just school. You might come from an unhappy family and family not giving you much time. I think the compulsive behaviours, so it could be spending, but it's often food. And what is it doing? I suppose it's to fill a void, to fill that emptiness. Various people said they wolf down their food. Got to get it in quickly. Someone else may take it. And to be honest, that does happen in some non-boarding families where there isn't a lot of food and there are 4 kids to feed, and you just got to be quick. But in a boarding setting, I don't know. Did you have experience where food was sort of pleasurable? It's all long trestle tables and, you know, rush and quick, and, you know, if you got it down quickly, you could go and do something else.
Yeah, I mean, for us, the food was pretty terrible the first 5 or 6 years, 5 years. Then we got a canteen in the morning and evening. So lunch was still trestle table, 14 people. Food arrived at one end. If it was nice food, then it would be eaten, and there'd be very little coming down to the end. So I remember having stomach aches a lot of the time that first year, and I used to have my supplemented by tuck, which wasn't great, crisps and chocolate and
when it wasn't stolen,
peanuts when it wasn't stolen. But some kids didn't even have that. So
could you go to your tuck anytime you liked? We were restricted to once a week. It was under lock and key, and there was someone supervising one item once a week.
No, we could go more or less any time, but you weren't in the house because we were timetabled. You weren't in the house very often, so it's only 2 or 3 times a day you really could. And it was on the main corridor. So if you were a younger year, you're going to get some food, the vultures arrive. You know, it's like, hey. So but that was nice at the beginning because that's the popularity. It's like, oh, I can give of that. So yeah, we had that where, you know, people would often be seen the first years wandering around the dining hall with their dishes looking from different tables for more food.
Really?
Yeah.
Really hungry. It's a comment that's made so often. Really hungry.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is the physical hunger, but there's also the I want to fill the emotional gap.
Yeah. What about you at your school? Was that an issue, hunger?
No, I think the food wasn't very great, but I don't remember being hungry. I do remember you couldn't go to a tuck box more than once a week. All supervised. No, I think there were people who were hungry. I don't remember people sneaking into the kitchens. And I don't remember what you're describing, which is it started at one end, there was nothing left. I think everybody got, trying to think how that happened, but everybody did get a portion. What we had to do was we had to talk to staff, so you all moved one place along. Actually, on reflection, I think this was quite a good plan, but at the time it wasn't enjoyable. And the people at the end had to talk or make conversation with the teacher or a senior girl. And some of them were delightful and some of them made it hard for you.
Okay.
And I think it's a good learning, because I have been in a school where I've sat in amongst in the canteen, and the boys there didn't know how to do this. 1 or 2 had learnt from the family, but they were not being encouraged to know how to make a conversation. And it's a good skill to have in life. You don't know when you're going to need it.
Yeah, I was very shy myself, and I just learned not to speak myself. Was my defense. So I was very insecure, and I still have that even when I'm doing the podcast. Sometimes my brain will freeze, and it's like I've disappeared off into my head. I have to go, oh, what were you saying, Piers? I was like, I can't remember. So
but I think the girls somehow internalize some of these traumas. So as I say, that could be the disordered eating or the extreme anxiety, the compulsions, the spending. I think the boys, perhaps some girls do too. I can't put them all in the same category, but I think boys can be more physical.
Mm,
I'm not saying girls aren't physical, but I think, they do tend to internalize it, whether
mm.
that's the rage, their aggression, whether they're left with this, quite a lot of left with this feeling, going back to not being heard, left with this feeling of, do I have a right to exist?
Yeah.
Now, how can you bring up girls or anybody with that feeling? Is that the family? Is that the education? Is that the school? That's not a good, it's not a good output for a child to have.
Do I have the right to exist? Amazing. Yeah.
So a lot of them will therefore think, well, I'll adapt and behave like a man, not totally, but in the workplace, because that will be seen to be acceptable.
Mm.
I am hoping it's very different now. I am hoping it's very different. I think there are lots of girls who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, hopefully even 50s, who don't feel like that. But I do think those that are probably now 60, 70 and older, that group, they lived a life with that sense, which has been offered to them without it being actually very overt.
I have actually. I was doing a workshop a couple of weeks ago about trauma and leadership, and a lady did share that she would worked in civil service just 5-10 years ago, I think, and she was saying that it was a lot of ex-boarders who were working there. She said they used to call her a girl. She was in her 30s, and they'd give her projects to do, knowing it'd be too hard for her to do. So make it something because they didn't think she could do it. And if she did, they would be kind of surprised and upset that she'd managed to do it. She said it was horrible. And
That's a bit bitchy, isn't it?
yeah. It was kind of, she was really looked down upon in that workplace. And as I was sharing about what ex-boarders are like, and she actually really got, that's why this environment was like it was.
Oh. So that's sort of getting at other people.
Yeah.
Something I'm sure this is perhaps with the men as well, but I never really get the idea that some of the clients know what joy is. They don't really enjoy. I mean, yes, they enjoy certain things, but they don't have that inner joy. And I imagine this is because their life has been around surviving. Those two words don't sort of marry up very well.
Yeah, I think so. I really resonate. I think I was just depressed, and I think through the help of my wife, it's like learnt more joy in the Buddhist way, and I find for me joy is often when I'm not doing anything, I'm just sitting or just being in appreciation or being in nature. But before that time, I wouldn't give myself the space because I was always
So
busy.
you're not allowed it.
Exactly.
You've been taught you should be doing something. Run off and do this. Yes.
And while you're doing that, you're thinking of the next thing. So therefore, where the joy and the happiness comes from is just that appreciating the now. Oh, this is beautiful. I'm so lucky. But most of the time, I was just moving from one thing to the next. So there was no joy. So yeah, I can resonate and hear that with clients as well.
Yes, I do just want to flag up a few. I know you've talked about puberty in earlier podcasts, but I would just say that at that puberty stage, support and guidance is critical, and you hope it comes from family, but you're not at family. So quite often it's quite stunted, it's quite sort of halted. And I think it's a bigger issue for girls. Boys are much more overt about their bodies, talk about them, and they're just more comfortable in a way. But girls seem to get the impression that their bodies, it's a source of shame. So you get laughed at it if you're the first one, with breast emerging. You might not have anyone there to help you with menstruation and periods. I remember strip washes, with a matron and all your roommates there. Roommates trying not to make it a humiliating experience, but they don't have a choice of leaving the room and to make it more comfortable. And the individual learns to disconnect, really. This perhaps leads later on into relationships and disconnected. Girls asking mum to get them a bra because they're being mocked and so on. Mum not thinking it's necessary or not taking the time to do it. You're not going to get it from the matron at school. Baths, 3-minute baths, people have talked about, a queue, a rota, shared baths and water, lack of shower, no showers after sport, fortnightly hair wash, hair length was prescribed, daily nail inspection. I mean, this isn't what boys get. I think it's very different.
Yeah,
Very sexually. Sorry.
we did have hair length. We couldn't have it below our shoulders.
This was one, it wasn't my experience, but it was somebody's comment, yes. We certainly had tunic length, that we had a termly inspection. You had to make it 2 inches off the floor, or above your knee, so we all had to kneel down and it was measured. Shapeless tunics, I mean, talk about femininity. Shapeless tunics, not made to look attractive in any way. But you're always taught, deportment, and some people were taught flower arranging. You weren't being necessarily taught the academic stuff. And coming back to food, you need to be well fed during puberty. Naturally the body, puppy fat, you get larger. You need to prepare yourself biologically, obviously having children, but hopefully at 13, 14 you're not doing that. But biologically, your body needs that food. And just going back to food, I've got here, somebody said their food was foul, dreadful, gloopy and slops, lukewarm, congealing, and inedible jacket potatoes. I mean, that sounds nice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, all these things are sitting there with no one really too bothered. And do the parents know this? I mean, do the parents know? I've talked to various people who particularly children coming from overseas cultures, wouldn't dream of saying in a letter, I'm not enjoying this. This doesn't work. I'm being teased. I had my bed, whatever, yesterday. They would only, because they're honourable to their family, they would only put good news in there. And the girls who wrote, I'm not enjoying this, help me, and got themselves expelled, just got sent back again. It's just, if their letters ever got through. Yeah.
I think it was that thing that you had that one opportunity to speak. I mean, I had a diary that I did on my first year at school. It's interesting. I kind of just share what happened. But as I was reading through it when I was writing my book, I realized there was key things. One was boredom. Another thing was most pages I'm being hit, but I'm being bullied or something. And another thing was, the food wasn't great. And it was, overall was just boredom. I was just bored all the time.
Of course, if you're a bright child, you're going to be first in various things, but you don't like to do that. You are going to be bored in some of the time, some of the lessons.
Yeah.
So when you were bored, what did you do? Because if it's very structured time, were you bored within the structured time? Or are you talking about boredom because there was nothing to do in the unstructured hours?
It was just the lessons. I mean,
bored in the lessons.
Studies, or history. I wasn't inspired at all by the classes. And I couldn't speak to anyone about it. I can remember before I got to boarding school, if I had a problem with my homework, I'd go and ask my parents. And at school, you couldn't really ask anyone. You couldn't get off your homework station to go and ask.
No.
So
that's the structure. You've got a homework station.
Yeah.
It's not like you've got a room and you can nip into the boy next door or the senior boy on your corridor. And
no, you had to stay there. I mean, as we got older, it was easier to move around, but we had very structured even till 18. You had your time. So,
well, I think talking about not being inspired, I think I was unlucky in the era that I was at school, in that it was post-war, and a lot of the staff, female staff, they were all female staff, weren't qualified teachers that I know. I think one was. They were people, this is me with my thoughts, that needed accommodation. They were single women, needed accommodation, perhaps had a language, so they might have learned that somewhere. They may have gone to uni, but they came and taught. But they weren't necessarily inspired teachers, and it was a sort of a low level academic offering. Whereas I think Well, I think actually in some of the boys' schools in that era, the men also needed a job, could teach, perhaps have got chemistry degree, but would you mind teaching geography?
Yeah.
You know, whereas now it's different
Mm, mm,
in the
yeah.
private schools.
Yeah. 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 I think Nick said that his first job was, he hadn't trained as a teacher, but he got a job in India at a boarding school. And just, been to Oxford. And right. He just sent a letter, can I have a job? And they said yes.
Probably you're able to swap and do that. But I just think a lot of the staff were fairly limited in their worldly experience.
Mm.
And I remember the first time we had a teacher come in, and she was a married woman.
Right.
Everyone was fascinated.
Mm.
I don't know that it made the lessons any different, but it was very narrow, very narrow. There are some clients who come through and they've obviously had a good education and done well and got on academically, but at some expense.
Yeah.
To do well wasn't always popular.
Yeah. So we've kind of been talking for about an hour, 70 minutes. Are there any other things that from that list that I sent through to you of questions? Anything? We've spoken about quite a lot of them: food, where's home?
Hmm.
Is there any
I
others
think
that
there's quite a lot about rage and how women hold
Mm.
on to that, but that could be other people. But I mean, it's not expressible. They don't know where to put it. And also people who've travelled from overseas, so UK families living overseas. I've never heard the men talk about it, but the women who were left at a very young age to come over on their own, but incensed when they then were expected at a young age to look after younger siblings, because they hadn't had that cushion, that luxury.
Yeah.
And then they were expected to do that. And often that carried on through life. They continued sort of in their head looking after their siblings and feeling this was an obligation. Okay, that happens in lots of families, but it was the fact that I'm only 8, I'm traveling overseas, and then I'm 9, and I'm expected to not only do that, but look after someone. And another girl who didn't travel overseas, but she would be sent off on the train and had to have a change of train, sitting on an empty platform, completely alone at a very young age, waiting for the next train for quite a few minutes. But younger siblings were taken to school, different school. Why not me? And there might well have been a really good explanation, but she didn't have that explanation. So how do you interpret that when you're young? And these upsets, sit there, but they're not voiceable. They're not voiceable. Yeah. I don't know whether a boy would voice them, but they're not voiceable. And I think this sort of taps into the self-esteem and confidence that women quite often don't have. They're often apologetic. You often hear women saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," apologizing almost for themselves. Where does that come from? Is that from the family? Is that from just their whole experience within the school setting? But I do think there's healing. I think to go and seek help is terrific and takes a lot of courage. To be heard, believed, to have tell their story, to be acknowledged, their feelings acknowledged, and to help them create a survival self. This is good, and sort of cancel out that shame and denial of self is important. And to try and reconnect, this is for men and women, reconnect with that authentic self that they lost at, let's say, 7. I don't think if you go at 12 or 13, you lose that self. It's not quite the same. The issues are different. But I think really when the child development stage is halted and interrupted, it's really interrupted if it's 7, and worse if it's 4 or 5.
And how do you find people do re-find that authentic self?
Well, it's very painful because it's very distressing to think I could have had this self all these years. Some don't find it, and some feel quite different when they do. They feel so pleased they've been able to engage with that 7-year-old. I don't think it happens from session 1 to session 20.
Yeah, takes time.
A lengthy process.
Yeah, and I've often seen that with Exborders is that we sometimes want to do the work, but it takes time And I think Nick talks about that in his book a bit in Trauma, Abandonment, Privilege, that often a boarder will go to 5 or 10 sessions. They go, right, okay, that's enough.
Half term, stop.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely there's a half term, there's a, exeat half term, and they don't come back, or
Yeah.
very frequently that happens.
And if someone is at that point, what do you suggest? Is that something they need to, if they're wanting to, whoa, I can't do this.
But I think if you're able to engage with them, I think it's about having that conversation and perhaps observing with them. But I like to work with what the client needs. If they're needing that time, and it's talked about, then they need that time. Perhaps it's quite frightening, I think, for a lot of people to go looking. It's almost easier for some, a bit like in a relationship, it's easier not to have one. For some, it's easier not to go that route. Because it does unravel and does bring you a whole lot of feelings that you've shoved over in locked away somewhere, and you don't know the language of feelings. A lot of people, a lot of boarders just don't know the language. That's not just women, it's men and women. But I think for me to help someone live their life for themselves, this is more the women, rather than be the people pleaser or the loner, but to help them really feel freer and have permission to sort of do what they want, or to do it their way, rather than that apology, that self-doubt, but just to get up there and go. But that's partly society's need of women over the years, and I'm not sure it's terribly healthy now, where they're having to be everything: the career woman, the mother. Where's the child fit into that? There isn't an ideal answer. And the modern man is not quite as free as the men of my generation, where they're expected to do whatever, long job, long hours, and still do an awful lot of the stuff at home.
Yeah.
The world's gone a little crazy.
It has. And like I was saying at the beginning, it seems that at the moment there's just this real pressure that people, especially lead up to Christmas anyhow, but I'm just really sensing everyone's suddenly, I'm so busy. Such amount of pressure on people. So
roll on the 4-day week.
Yeah, definitely.
So does that give you some thought? I think a lot of what I've talked about probably affects men and women, but boarding does. A little bit about puberty and the education and the...
Yeah, I think that's been great. I really found that useful to hear the stories as well. I love that you've brought in people's quotes. That's been really helpful, because I think sometimes, again, I have read, Joy's work. I haven't read the women's experience at boarding school, but it's useful for me to hear those different stories, and hopefully people listening to these will be able to resonate. So thank you so much for your time and your insight and your wisdom. So is there any final thing? I'll put down in the description a link to your website, so if people want to get in touch that way. Is there any final...
And a boarding recovery website, because there are various people, and the other is, of course, Nick's. I haven't got it to hand what it is, but the Boarding Survivors, because I think Lynn can give out a wider list of names of people who can help across the country.
I'll put that in Boarding School Survivors, I think it is .com. And then a boarding recovery, I'll put those in. And then your website details as well.
Lovely.
Any final things you'd like to share or say?
I suppose I'd just like a lot of people to feel freer to be themselves, and to allow that to happen. And it's probably too much to ask that they can resolve it within their families. I think that is hard, because not all families want to hear. When questioned, they tend to go into themselves and think, oh, I'm being criticised, or comment, and so they're not really open to hearing the upset. I did have one client who challenged his family several times, but he did challenge them once he left school,
Mm-hmm.
Having begged to be released from the school he was at, they said, we do realise that we probably didn't pick the right school, or we didn't make the right choice for you.
Mm-hmm.
But they couldn't do it while he was at school.
Mm.
So children get sent. They don't go to boarding. They get sent out of the home. Yeah. And, you know, if a girl isn't being sent for education, what is she being sent for? I wonder. You know, to be taught in the days gone by to be a young woman, a young lady. But now, you know, I can appreciate that if you're at school, you don't spend time commuting. So you can spend more time studying. But the individual children, why am I not at home?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then when you go home for the holidays, this is male and female, do you know anyone there? Mm-hmm. They've all got their little groups, or you don't even know who they are to join in a group. So it's not ideal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But of course it could be generational. That's why you've been sent.
Yeah. I can resonate with that. Not knowing anyone at home, or had friends, but then you go away and then you come back and you've just grown apart and you've got nothing in common.
And they've got other things going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I've really appreciated. You were going to say?
No, I was just going to thank you for the opportunity to talk a bit about it, because I would love more people who know nothing about boarding to become a little aware of it. Wasn't easy for them. It wasn't the luxury and the lovely privilege and the web privileges.
Mm.
You know, in my case, playing fields and things, but only a small selection of sports, whereas the boys had this selection of sports to choose from.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for adding your voice to this, to letting people who didn't go to boarding school. This is some of the things which went on. So, yeah, I appreciate that. So thank you so much for your time today. And,
thank you, Piers.
Yeah, please do, reach out to Rosemary at her website. So thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.